Here. Welcome to the show, everybody. Along with my twin brother, Danny Brown, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Twins Talk It Up podcast. Today, you're in for a special treat. A good friend of mine, Matt Blake, is joining us today. Matt is a thought leader and a sales trainer and is the owner and president of Blake Consulting and Selling. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Thrilled to be here.
Matt, I want to definitely introduce you to our audience, but before we go into our topic today and what we're going to really dive into, take a moment to really introduce to our listeners who you are. Who is Matt Blake? What's your why?
Sure. Glad to do it. So I like to say my real career began in 1996. So I am an entrepreneur by heart and one of those entrepreneurs that flew by the seat of his pants for many, many years. So I fell into the litigation support industry in 1996. Now, most people do not know but anything about litigation support, and that's not really important. But what is important that we dealt with litigators and attorneys, which aren't the easiest people to work with, and ultimately, I'm asked, the first question I'm typically asked are two questions. One is, are you an attorney? And the answer is no. And they say, oh, the follow-up question is, you must be a paralegal or you have some sort of legal experience. And the answer to that is also no. I literally fell into a sales position. And what litigation support in my world, what that really meant is we collected information for attorneys for deposition and trial, such as medical records, employment records, scholastic records, did all the legal paperwork for those cases as well. So basically, we supported law firms with the information they needed in order to go to trial and deposition with. So, as I said, 1996, joined a mid-sized company, and I grew through that company fairly quickly. I had a real desire not only to sell, but I wanted to run something. Ultimately, I wanted to be a business owner. And in the year 2000, I had been promoted into a regional manager. So I was running an actual region for the company. And I had an opportunity in 2001 to actually buy my region from the company, which I took that opportunity. I was never afraid to take risks. I always felt that it'll all work out. If you work hard and that you were dedicated to what you do, it's all going to work out. And what I found out over the next 17 years, which we grew the company over those 17 years from a regional-based company to a company that was operating in multiple states. However, over the 17 years, I took a lot of lumps. And it was interesting, Danny and David, not everybody worked the way I worked. Not everybody thought the way I thought. So I made many, many, many mistakes along the way, whether it's how I managed people, how I spoke to people, my hiring practices, financial mistakes. But it was all really important to my actual growth. And even dealing with clients, learning how to actually sell. I didn't realize that you actually had to learn how to sell something. I thought it was just a matter of people liking me and taking people out to lunch, and everybody will buy. I'm a likable guy. Everybody's going to buy from me, right? Didn't realize I had to be a problem solver as well. So the long and short of it is that was fortunate enough to learn from my mistakes. I think there's two types of people out there. One that dwells on their mistakes, others who learn from them. I can't say I never dwelled on them, but I do believe I was a fairly quick learner, and I really wanted to learn lessons from them. So in 2012, I started to think to myself, is this something I really want to do? This type of company and this business is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And am I really happy? And the answer was no. That I started really wanting to do something. While this was a great company, provided a great life for me, had a great staff. It took years to build my staff to where it was, and the company was really was really operating on, it was self-functioning at that point, and I wasn't as near. I didn't have to be as involved in the business as much as I once was. But again, I wasn't overly thrilled and excited, or even to get out of bed every morning to do what I do. So in 2016, I was approached to sell my company, and initially I turned it down. And a big reason was because of the people. I really, really was tight with my staff because, again, we weren't a huge company in terms of people. I had 20 people. And over time, as you know, as you guys know, you develop relationships with those folks. But the more I really thought about it, and really what I wanted to do in my life, it was something that I just wasn't really excited about. And I was still young enough where I didn't need to, I had other opportunities that I wanted to pursue. So I ended up selling the company in 2017. And I went to go work for the company that bought mine, which was a much larger organization. I went there for 14 months. I was on the executive of the committee of the company. Was able to take my entire staff with me, nice. Which was important to me at that time. So they all were able to have jobs and fit in within the organization. But after about, I would say, after really truly about 6 months, I wasn't really wanting to be in the industry anymore. Wasn't really excited about where I was. And what I realized that what I really wanted to be was a coach and mentor. And my enjoyment was to be able to help see other people's success. And that's what really led me to wanting to be a management coach and a sales trainer. Now, if you take salespeople, for an example, one of the reasons I decided to do what I do is I really wanted to work with salespeople where they had the proper attitude and behavior and technique, where they have the confidence to build trust with their buyers, and they have an authentic sales approach to where they can have a collaborative sales approach with their buyers, where not only are the buyer's needs met, but guess what, sort of the salesperson's needs as well as the company's needs as well. So that's a long way of saying that's what really led me to where I am today.
That's a great thing. This is Danny, by the way. Matt, I appreciate you breaking that down. One of the things that really stood out was that not many people, when they sell their companies, are allowed to take all their employees with them. And one of the things that you stated before was that how much you were really close to your employees, how much you really valued them, and why it was important to bring them on with you to this new organization. Can you expound a little bit more on that? Because to me, I think that ties into your why, about why you love salespeople, why you love training people. It just seems to me that you're really a people person, and the overall aspect of the health, the mental health, the financial health of the people around you, the people that you lead, are very important to you. And you don't really get to see that today. I mean, you think about, there's a company called Gravity Payments. I don't know if you guys kept up with that company, where the CEO gave a minimum wage of $70,000 to all of his employees. Wow. And this year during the COVID, the company said, the CEO said, look, we only have 3 months of run rate before we're going to go out of business, because people are not eating out as much anymore. They're not using credit cards as much. So what should we do as a company? Because I don't want to lose anybody. And so all the employees volunteered to take pay cuts, to do this, to do that. And so they came together as a consensus, as a team. And then when the company was able to take off again, because now the economy is starting to pick up, he repaid all the employees back. And I thought that was very phenomenal. So when I hear your story about your employees and why you didn't sell the first time. So tell me a little bit more. What was it about your heart and your nature, and why you cared so much about your employees? Because I feel like that's really what's missing in leadership today. The employees don't feel as if the leaders care about them, that they only feel like they're a number.
Yeah, I agree, Danny. And the truth is, why it was important is because I made so many mistakes over time that I realized in order for me to be successful and the company to be successful, I really needed to take an active interest in the people that are working for me and really want to know something about them. Not just about, the surface level stuff, really what makes them tick. What are their goals? What are they what are they passionate about, and why do they want to work even for my organization. So over time, we work very closely together, where that I really relied on them to bring their expertise into to be for us to be successful. And as a result, our company wouldn't have been what it was if it wasn't just me. I couldn't have done it without them. And I shared that with the buyers of my company, that our success really came from them. And yeah, sure, I had a little part in it, but ultimately, that in order for us to keep our clients, in order for us to for them to keep growing, and to be a benefit to their organization, that this was crucial for them to be a part of it, and for them to buy into the new culture. Because as you guys probably know, we had a certain culture. Now we were now going into a different culture. And a lot of times cultures don't match, they don't align, and that can be a detriment to any organization, especially when you're bringing others aboard. So the idea being that if we want to keep growing, and get them to share into the new organization, that it was important that they not only come aboard, but guess what? None of them took pay cuts. All of them still had the autonomy to do what they needed to do. And the organization that bought mine saw the value in that, and I think made a really smart move by bringing everybody aboard. And it turned, and honestly, to this day, most of them are still with the organization. So it's actually been a win-win for not only my people, but the organization itself.
That's awesome. This is Danny again. I want to follow up on that because I feel like you hit on a point right there, the autonomy aspect. There's so many, and I've run sales organizations. I've run global sales organizations all over the world, where I've had to spend 2-3 weeks in Asia and Europe, and just because I want to hit each of the region, each of my country directors. But one of the things that helped me, and I'm glad to hear it also was very successful for you, is the autonomy aspect. It takes a lot of trust to let your employees do what they do best, and to have the freedom to believe that you believe in them, that they can go make decisions on behalf of what's best for your company as well as what's best for the leadership. Can you expound a little bit more about trust? Because I think that that company that purchased your company, they figured it out. They were like, wait a minute, you're doing something so unique and so different. Let's continue that into this new cultural aspect of our company. So tell me a little bit more about that trust and how you're able to build it so quickly with your team, and why the company that purchased your company was immediately able to see the impact of that and wanted to continue it on.
Sure. It's a great question, Danny. And from my perspective, I don't think enough leaders take an active interest in their people. Okay. And what I mean by active interest is, I believe leaders build trust by understanding what makes their people tick. And specifically, how many leaders really take the time to want to know what are the goals of their folks? And I'm not talking about company goals. We all have a habit as leaders to want to talk about company goals, what we want to accomplish, what the organization wants to achieve. But the reality of it is, people's personal goals are far more important to them than the company goals. So I think it first starts in to understanding what their goals are of being a part of the organization. What do they want to achieve? And where not only asking a question, hey, where do you want to be in 5 years? Okay. It'd be much more deeper than that. Less than 5% of people actually write out goals. And understanding, who they are, and challenging even your employees, because oftentimes it's not going to, you'll hear things such as from the employees when you ask what their goals are. Hey, David, what's a goal? I want to make more money. Salespeople want to make more money, right?
Always.
So I used to give them, here's $10. You just made more money. Now what? Okay. So it's to go deeper in that. It's to understand, okay, why do you want to make more money? And share with me some of what do you want to achieve with that? What do you want your life to look like? In other words, what's the intention of what your life looks like? And I think once you can align people's personal goals with the company to say, okay, then what do we need to accomplish within the organization to meet your goals? And by the way, are they realistic? So I think when you establish a realistic what can be accomplished, understanding your people, listening, being a better listener, not just telling people what to do, but actually listening to them. And then when they know when your people know that you really are interested in about them and that it's safe for them to share information with you, I think that's where the trust begins. And then of course you got to cultivate that over time.
I appreciate you sharing that, Matt. And we really are going to do a deep dive into corporate culture, how to build an organization's really what we call the face of the organization, how to build it around people. Let me make a thought here and really get your feedback on this. Stephen M.R. Covey, in his book entitled The Speed of Trust, he spoke about how trust is, well, at least at the speed at which it's established, is the most critical component of the success of an organization. He kind of made the point that if you remove trust, you can see economies fall apart, the strongest governments fall apart, relationships fall apart. But he talked about how if you have trust, if it's developed the right way and you leverage it the right way, that it's the most important factor to success. And what was interesting, Matt, he actually talked about trust being a different type of currency, that is the most important currency that a business should have. What do you say about looking at building organizations? If you've done this with your group, that was indeed the currency that you established, so much to the point that the company that bought your business kept everybody on board?
Yeah, I mean, again, where to have trust, right? The way I look at it is you can't have deep conversations if you don't have trust. And the reality is when you have people that come to meetings or come to situations where they're just not sharing information that the leaders want to hear, right? That they feel safe enough to talk about real problems or even call out the leaders themselves about where they're going to question decisions. They're going to question where they're going to question maybe even initiatives that are being done where they are bringing their expertise. They're bringing where they feel they're in a safe environment where they can have a productive conversation. Doesn't mean they're always going to get what they want out of it,
No.
but that they have the autonomy again to make decisions. I think that the biggest part about trust is when people are not afraid to make decisions.
Yeah.
How many organizations have you been a part of where the people will not make a decision without the leader? And the leaders that oftentimes, I call them rescuers, right? If you take sales managers, for an example, how many times are sales managers rescuing their people?
Yeah.
Where they come in and they bring a situation or that's going on with a prospect or with a buyer, and the leader says, okay, here's what you want to do. And what are they learning? What are the people learning? Or they end up jumping in themselves to try to fix the situation. Where people aren't afraid to make decisions, but more importantly, they're not afraid to make mistakes. And the reality of it is, if they make a mistake, every mistake is correctable, typically. And again, what are you learning from your mistakes? Because to me, what I used to say to my folks all the time, if we're not making mistakes, we're not growing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because you can't grow unless you're making a mistake. It means you're not taking risks, you're not stretching yourself, and getting people to really get comfortable with that, and ultimately, I think that's where trust where you have trust, where people aren't afraid to make mistakes and they're not also afraid to make decisions.
That is awesome. This is Danny, by the way. I want to expound upon that in a unique way. We spoke about trust from an employee's perspective, right? Where they're not afraid to make a decision. And as you stated earlier, decisions are allowing you to grow. And most decisions you can recover from, or it's not that big of a catastrophe. So when we think about trust in another way as well, how do you, from a leadership perspective, how have you been able to get executives at corporations?
Great question.
I mean, because it's like it's easy to help. You've done it for employees, but how can you help executives and tell business owners and leadership, look, you gotta be the one to exude the trust.
Yeah.
Don't wait for the employees to trust you first. You have to be the one to exude the trust, because it's so easy for an employee to trust you, to follow you, because you set a great example, Matt. They followed you to the new organization, all that other stuff. But now that you're in an executive leadership role, you have your own consulting firm, you're speaking with business leaders all over the US. How are you helping these individuals to basically showcase trust first?
Sure. Well, it begins with a question I typically ask is when talking to executives and other business leaders, I ask them how they run their meeting. What run their meetings? What do their conversations sound like? And for an example, if you take again, I use a sales manager's position for a second, is when they debrief their sales calls and sales meetings. I said, tell me about it. Tell me how do you know what a qualified opportunity is? How does your reps know what a qualified opportunity is? Oftentimes what I hear, Danny, is sales reps will come to a meeting, and as well as any other employees, and somebody will ask, well, again, going back to a sales rep. So if I'm asking David, he's the sales rep. So David, how do you feel the meeting went? Okay, the reality of it is, it doesn't matter how they feel it went. And by the way, most salespeople out there, if they don't feel safe, the last thing they're going to do is share bad news.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to just share they're going to just share what the manager wants to hear. So I think what it begins with is being consistent. Consistency is we all want structure, regardless of what people say, is having a consistent structure. So in other words, where trust begins is setting the expectation, but not just the leader's expectation, but understanding from what they expect from their people. In other words, what do you need from your people to come to the meeting? What kind of information is going to be required of them, so that it's very consistent what they need to bring and why that's important. And also from knowing what is going to be helpful for your people when we have meetings, because I know a pet peeve of mine when I joined that larger organization, we had meetings upon meetings upon meetings upon meetings. So many of them were meaningless. Okay. So I think by understanding who you're meeting with, understanding what your expectations are, what their expectations are, and what they want to get out of it, what's going to be helpful for them, and always defining what the outcome of that conversation or that meeting is going to be, and having a set structure each and every time, because anytime somebody comes to a meeting or a conversation where there's any type of uncertainty, that leads to anxiety.
Yes.
And when you make it safe and make it very clear what we're going to cover, why we're going to cover, and it's mutually agreed upon, leaders, again, how many of us love being told what to do? And so I think once you understand what's mutually agreed upon, and more importantly, if you're going to set and getting your people to think also when you're setting goals or you're setting an agenda, getting their input, getting them to asking them questions like, hey, share with me what you expect can happen out of X, Y, and Z. And then have a follow-up question. Can you share to me, is that doable? Is that reasonable? And why do you ultimately feel so comfortable in being able to accomplish that? That gets people to share into your vision, gets people to feel safe, get people to really, then they're buying it. Because if they say it, if your employee says it, they're going to buy into it much quicker, not something you're telling them what to do. It's like telling your kids what to do all the time, right? They have to discover on their own many times why something is important. It's no different from any of the folks that any of your employees or any of your direct reports. They got to discover on their own why it's important to achieve certain objectives that the organization wants to accomplish.
I totally agree with that. This is Danny, by the way. It hits home with me, your example. I used to lead quarterly briefing reviews with my team. We had to do our forecasts, year-end calls. And when you're running a sales organization for an organization that's global and you have to meet with each region, one of the things I've always had to do is basically trust that the country directors, that they're reporting accurate forecasts. I can use Salesforce all day long. I don't know what CRM tools other people use to get a number, but I don't trust that all the time. What I trust is what's coming out of the mouths of my leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust them because I've given them the freedom to give me bad news so that we can grow.
Yeah.
And one of the things you had stated very well is that you had set the environment ahead of time. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with leaders around the US who don't really get involved with their team. They just look at numbers all day long behind a screen. And then at the end of the quarter, hey, why didn't you make your numbers? Or, hey, we're going to put you on a PIP because you didn't do well. Well, they weren't really actively engaged. And this goes back to Dave had set up a quote, which was earlier from Mr. Covey. And Warren Buffett said another quote. He said, trust is like the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody really notices it. But when it's absent, everybody notices, right? So Warren Buffett is one of the thought leaders of the world today. The guy still lives in the same house. He still eats McDonald's every morning for breakfast. You would like, man, this guy's unique. This guy's different. But the fact that he has 300,000 employees globally, $162.5 billion in annual revenue. And this is what he said. He views trust as a core component of his business strategy. And you have eloquently stated that when you're sitting down with an employee and you ask them a question, well, how do you see this? What do you think about this? What we're trying to do is get employees to really get involved and ask deeper questions, open-ended questions, to start understanding, hey, I'm not just reporting a number. Why did the call go this way? Why did it happen this way? And why did it go this way? So the fact that you're asking your employees to get more in depth, to be more open about what they're thinking and how they're thinking, and setting an environment where it's okay to not know the answer. It's okay to not have met the results. It's okay to express disappointment. You just don't hear that today in the environment. You don't really see that at all. I mean, so when you're helping these leaders hire people and you're helping these leaders to mentor and grow the existing employees, what is that trait or what is that quality you're helping them to be able to see beyond just a nice suit and a tie? I mean, what are you looking at and how are you educating them to look at an individual today?
And Matt, before you share, this is David. Could you also speak to the importance of open-ended questions? Because it sounds like to me, part of establishing trust is really learning how to communicate differently as a leader to your teams and to your employees.
So I think that if we talk about what you're looking for when you're talking to a possible candidate of hiring or when you're interviewing people, is I believe firmly that when you're asking questions or what you really want to pay attention to, again, how passionate are they? What's their body language look like when they're sharing information? Our body language, by the way, is the loudest way we speak. So it's really important. It's tough in today's world when we're doing the Zoom calls and video conferencing. But again, I think when you're speaking with somebody and to anybody, when you're asking questions like those open-ended questions, but then getting the people to share real life examples. In other words, if X, Y, and Z happened, if this problem happened, and you're experiencing it, not only asking the question, how did you handle it, but asking questions like, give me a real life example of when this happened and how did you respond, and understanding how they deal with stress, how they deal with making decisions, how they deal with communicating with people. If you get real life examples and then understand what the impact of whatever happened was and what they learned from it. And again, and because oftentimes when people are interviewing folks, do they really give them the full picture of what's going to happen in their position?
Yeah.
Right. So again, I'll go back to sales. How many people talk to their salespeople to say there's no other, you're not going to have another job that's going to have more emotional highs and emotional lows than being a salesperson. And how do they deal with that? Like how are they going to manage that? So I think again, real life examples, getting to really understand the way they think, the way they communicate, and are they going to be afraid to communicate bad information to their manager?
Yeah.
And because the last thing you want, and Danny, you said this, is you want as a good leader, you want all information.
Yeah.
Not the information you just want to hear. You want all information, and you also want their ideas of how to fix something and why they think the way they think. So I don't know if I'm quite answering your question, David, but again, I think when you get somebody to open up and they're able to, you really can dive into the way they deal with certain situations and be able to get them to express their solutions and their thought patterns. I think that goes a long way to really get to know somebody.
I appreciate you sharing that. This is Dave, by the way. I think, Matt, your point to not just having open-ended questions, but really learning to ask the right type of questions to give them the platform, the ability to be comfortable just to share what's on their mind, to be able to share their own ideas, their own solutions, and not feeling like they're going to have consequences or there's going to be some type of repercussion because they said the quote unquote wrong thing. And that's really how you build trust. But let me throw this out. We're in this age of the health pandemic. We've had social injustice going on. We've had the economy struggling in our country. Trust really gets exposed through times of challenge. So when you're dealing with executives, when you're dealing with business owners, Matt, how often does this come up about this exposure to risk, this exposure to the health pandemic, how this has challenged their ability to keep trusting in the people that they have?
All the time. It's the challenge now is that we're not face to face, right? We're not in with together. And again, that I think that separation in itself is a challenge. There's a lot of leaders out there who are now remotely managing their people. And I think it's more important than ever to have consistency. And you can't get away from what you were doing before. You got to adjust. And so I think it's really important if you're going to when you have meetings, that you're not afraid to talk about the topics at hand that everybody's facing right now, everybody's concerned with. You can't avoid them, right? And the reality of it is that I know for some of the organizations that I work with, it's been a real challenge to have people scattered throughout the world, and they're not meeting face to face. They're not meeting their customers face to face. They're not meeting their people face to face. So I think it's really important where when you have when you are conducting meetings, again, that you have consistent meetings. The leader can't miss meetings, cannot not be on time. That's the worst example you could ever show as far as I'm concerned. Consistent meetings, and during those meetings, again, it is, and I know I'm repeating myself, you have to have a safe space in my mind where the folks that you're working with have an opportunity to share anything you just mentioned, whether it's whatever's happening outside of with the pandemic or what's happening with current events that are good and bad, and allow them to share with what's going on and listen. See, too many leaders out there are not listening to their folks. And the most effective communicators, and you can do any research on this, listen 70% of the time. Okay.
Mm.
They're doing less talking and more listening. And as you're listening and letting them, because as they're talking, the biggest way you know you have trust with somebody is when they're talking.
Yeah.
And if they're not talking in your meetings, chances are you don't have trust. So as long as they're talking, and then in the end, there's always an outcome. There's always next steps that are going to happen that are clearer with both, with everybody involved. So one of the techniques that I've used in my meetings, at the end of our meeting, I will always pick on somebody, or at least two or three people, to then repeat back to me what are the next steps, what are the outcome from this meeting, and what are we going to talk about the next time we get together. So there's two things. For our next meeting, we already have objectives set for our next following meeting that we're going to have. Second is getting them to share what they took away from the meeting, action items they took away, and what are next steps. And when that happens, I know that they're engaged.
Yeah.
Nice.
And lastly is, again, too many leaders want to just tell everybody what to do, and then they just leave. How many times have you talked to a leader where they say, I've told them, we go over the same things over and over and over and over and over again? And what I say to them is that because you're telling them to do this, or because they share back with you what they took away from the meeting? So I'm telling them. Again, how many of us love being told what to do? It goes back to when we were kids. How many times do you love being told by your parents, even if they're right? How many times as you grew up, you think back to what your parents told you about, do X, Y, and Z, and then you're like, all of a sudden you're 20 years old, and you're like, now that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the people have to buy in. They have to share. And I think, again, I can't stress enough, they have to feel comfortable to talk.
Yeah. Matt, I appreciate you sharing that. This is Dave again. And let's talk about the impact of trust, because we're hearing this through your responses to the questions we're asking, and you're giving us great examples of how leaders can really look back at their meetings, look back at their conversations to say, is this really hitting home? Do I really have a connection? Am I building trust? But how does trust truly impact performance and productivity? You talk about not being able to see your clients, not being able to get out there and do sales the traditional way. I would have to imagine trust goes a long way to be able to get that sale again or renew that contract again. But it also has to go a long way to impacting how your people perform, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, can I give you a real life example, David?
Please.
So here's how I would define trust. From my last company, one of my production managers was a guy that was not a big communicator. He kept to himself, and oftentimes he could be very abrasive. But we had to learn how he communicated. What was his preference for communicating? And he didn't like long emails. So the person that he reported to, the way he would direct information to him, or send, even ask questions, were always through email. And my production manager took that the wrong way. He took, like, oftentimes that he's being attacked, being questioned, and again, not having a simple conversation. And what we realized was, I pulled both groups in to figure out, okay, what's the best way we can communicate? What's your preference of communicating? And because of emails and texts and so on, so we can't tell the emotion behind those emails, texts, and so on. And it was a very simple thing that the reality was that my production manager said, I prefer a conversation. And I prefer, if we're going to change something, or you have a question, I really want to understand why, because every time I'm questioned, he said this, every time I'm questioned, I feel like that I'm not being again, trusted. I feel like that people are questioning my work ethic, they're questioning my ability. And from the manager's perspective, he's like, I'm not thinking like that at all. I think you're doing a great job. I think so on and so forth. So there was miscommunication. So after we realized by just, because again, they weren't in the same office, that by picking up the phone and having a 10-minute conversation and where there's context behind why certain things were happening, it changed the demeanor of my production manager. So this was a guy who then took upon himself, he would come in on Saturdays, Sundays, unbeknownst to anybody. Wouldn't even, half the time I have to get upset with him because I'm like, look, you have to get paid. You just can't come in and he wasn't even looking for compensation. He did it because he always wanted his Mondays to be set. He didn't want to be anything behind. And in my industry, and I'm really proud to say this, and this is a credit to him, because truth be told, we were dealing with records, scanning and uploading information and, to our web portal and that kind of thing. And he was with me for 12 years, and his staff and him had only, in 12 years, I think they had 3 mistakes.
Wow.
Of uploading information, which is unheard of in my industry. They were so good at what they did, and it was a mundane job. It wasn't something that necessarily was fun to do. It wasn't easy to do, but just that little adjustment on how we were communicating and understanding how each other's preference was to communicate, including the manager who wanted to email, he had to adjust though. The leader had to adjust to how to communicate to his employee. And all of a sudden, having this employee now feels appreciated, feels like he's being listened to, feels like he's now buying into what the company wants to accomplish, and is taking all this responsibility on his own without any direction, all because we took the time to just understand, okay, what's the bottleneck here? How can we communicate? How can we adjust? Because as I said earlier, the biggest lesson I learned, as running a company, not everybody is going to think the way I think. Not everybody's going to behave the way I think. Although I thought that. I thought if I could lead by example by just working hard, everybody's going to follow me. That's not, and that's not going to be the case. And for anybody who's going through that, it's not going to be the case. I mean, it's taking an active interest in understanding how people communicate and how, as a leader, you adjust to your people. It's not them always adjusting to you, because again, if you want them to share into what you want to accomplish, I believe it's the leader's job to do that, to adjust to the people who are that you want them to share into what you want to accomplish.
This is Danny, by the way. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. I think one of the things you said that really hit home with me is the aspect of it does take time. There are a lot of leaders that are, I wouldn't say lazy, they're just not inspired to get to know each of their employees and understand what makes them tick. As you were talking about the production manager and how the production manager communicates. I like to call them love languages, right? People have a different love language. They like to be disciplined or talk to one way, either by email or directly. Other people like to communicate another way. So everyone's different. You can't treat everybody the same. And specifically in sales organizations, I've noticed people always like to hire the same type of sales reps. And then they believe that all the sales reps perform one way. They all need to be communicated one way. They all care about one thing. And what you've found is that a lot of the sales organizations will have one top dog and everybody else will be so underperforming. Mm-hmm. It's not really a good, accurate representation of how the organization is doing because it's breaking even. And so one of the things I hear you state over and over again, even with your personal example, you're always getting to the point where you're getting to know each of your employees. You know what they need, what they do well, how they like to be communicated, how they communicate back with you and to the rest of the people on the team. It takes a lot of effort for leaders to do that. And for me, when I was leading global organizations, I did a lot of traveling to the point where I told my wife, look, our kids cannot be going to school anymore. They have to be homeschooled because I want to take the family with me when I go on some of my trips. And I do this because I wanted to get to know my employees, even from a cultural perspective. Managing employees in the US is one thing, Imagine global employees with different cultural aspects,
Right.
how they like to be spoken to. Even when I was in Japan, I can never encourage or discipline my regional director in front of the team. I always had to be pulled to the side.
Yep.
And in India is one thing where everything they do, everything's perfect, everything's great. It's like, no, everything's not perfect, everything's not great. And if you give them a challenge, yeah, we can do that. We have it done by tomorrow. I was like, no, that's a 3-month project. What are you talking about tomorrow? So there's all this aspect going on, and you hit it home. You have led teams, and you stated the example. You've gotten to know each of your employees. You understand how they work. Even the fact that one of your employees came in on the weekends just to make sure that the week was set up perfectly, only had 3 mistakes in 3 years. That's phenomenal. Now, we have to sit down with leadership. And I know you do this now in your consulting practice. How are you telling leaders in a very politically correct way, hey, stop being lazy. Go out there, earn the trust of your employees, get to know them. I mean, how are you doing that? Because for me, I don't have time. I do a lot of work with startups. And I sit down with the leadership team and I just tell them, hey, look, you need to do this, this, and this. And you need to do it now, or don't have a team. I don't have time to play around. I'm in that startup 1 or 2 days a week. That's it. And so how are you getting that message across in a nice political way without ruffling feathers?
It all starts with, are they willing to change? Because to tell you the truth, I won't work with anybody who's not willing to make changes. And I think it starts there, is to really understand what do they want to accomplish? Why do they want to accomplish it? And are they willing to change? Are they willing to look at themselves and their organization and in order to make those changes? And again, it comes down to how upfront are they with everybody that is within their organization. And in other words, one of the questions I'll ask them is, tell me about your employees. What do you know about them?
Wow.
And oftentimes I'll get surface level information, and then I'll ask even more specific questions. Okay, when's the last time you've met with them to review their goals, and what do they want to accomplish, and what are they and how are those goals of the company meeting their personal goals? And I'll get them to give examples. 90% of the time, 95% of the time, the answer is we haven't. I haven't. I don't have time. I don't have this. Don't have that, and so on and so forth. So what I say to leaders, that at least 45 to 50% of the time they should be mentoring, coaching, and not managing. That's an effective leader. Okay, there's a big difference between managing and coaching and mentoring. So it begins with the fact that that they have to make changes and really wanting to take the effort to meet with their people, understand them, because it's pretty funny, Danny. I have people. I've met with my leaders that have told me my people just don't. They just don't. My people don't work hard enough. My salespeople don't know how to close. I hear those things all the time. And I'll turn around on them and I'll say things like, that just can't be true. And they're shocked. They say, what do you mean that can't be true? I said, you wouldn't pay people every 2 weeks to show up to do nothing. You just wouldn't do that. Okay. I said, I just have a hard time. And I said, do you honestly believe that the people that you have come to work and say, I can't wait to come to work and do nothing today? Yeah. That makes them feel good. I said that there's one or two problems, and one is that you're flat out you're not hiring the right people, right? Or the second is you don't really know your people, and so again, it's calling them out basically to say, look, what are you doing to take those extra steps and building that culture? Because it's a culture. It's a culture in which that people share in with what you want to, they share into your visions and your goals. And the last thing I'll say is, another question I ask quite a bit is, if I brought all your people in and sat in front of me and say, okay, everybody recite to me, what's the vision of this company? What is the vision? And what are you looking to achieve? And why is that important? Are they all it's going to say the same things? And if not, why not? And again, most of the time, it's like they don't know what they're going to say. It's just like the salespeople. You have salespeople out there. I ask them again when they go out and they give their their elevator pitch or their 30-second commercial. What do they say? And is it all the same thing? I have no idea what they're saying. Okay, do you think it's important that you do know they're representing your company and they're representing your brand and the value you bring to the marketplace? Do you think that's important to know? And so the leaders have to have a willingness to change and adapt, and not only adapt, they have to adapt over time because things are going to change. People are changing. Millennials are different. We all come from different backgrounds and different and understanding that and having the willingness. I think the key word there is the willingness to take that to go ahead and work towards that, and willingness to change, and a willingness to want to know who your people are.
I agree, Matt. I appreciate you sharing that. That's a great point. I will say that what I'm hearing and really gathering from your spirit is that when you develop the right culture and your employees feel that they're at ease to be able to share their thoughts, share their input, that is a more productive, it's a more energetic, it's a thriving organization. And it goes back to what you're saying earlier. You should hire the right type of people in the very beginning. What do you say to those organizations that are right now needing to, through this COVID pandemic, either retrain, relearn? How do you go back and really rebuild and establish this trust if you know at the end of the day that this COVID and health pandemic has exposed that some of those guys shouldn't be on your team? Are those people you still need to invest in? Are those people that you need to go ahead and retrain? How do you handle what you've shared earlier, and how do we go forward from this time?
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of hiring the right people, I will tell you the mistakes that I've made in the past is I hired people that based on my gut.
Mm.
They said the things I wanted to hear. They looked like the people that I wanted them to look like. And I would tell you, it was a disaster. Okay, I was the worst person hiring anybody because, and by the way, my nature is I want to give everybody a shot. So if they say the right things, right? So again, you got to define your onboarding process, and you have to, and getting input from others is huge, as you guys probably know. But also, what kind of success profiles have you developed that fit into your culture? In other words, what kind of assessments are being done? How are you getting real data and capturing that information to understand what a success profile looks like? So in other words, not only just going through a interview process, but also I'm a big believer in working with clients. So one of the exercises I did with my clients is I will ask them, pinpoint to me who you believe are the most successful, some of the most successful people in your organization, based on, again, it could be sales, management, operations, whatever. And they'll tell me Susie, Johnny, and I said, well, what makes them successful? And they'll explain to me. So what I think is important in terms of having a process, again, everything should have a process, including how you're going to hire people. So what we've done is we actually do behavioral and competency assessments of the most successful people in each area. And we develop a success profile that is real data, it's real information, so that when they can actually look, it's an MRI of this person that's coming aboard. And it's been hugely successful finding the right people to do that. So it's just not going off of a gut feeling, or just based on how that person shows up in and looks and sounds and feels when you interview them. You're also getting real data, and you can match that up with other people you have in your organization that are already successful. And is this person going to fit in our culture? It's because again, if they interview well, and in the end, when you have real data that you can use, that it should match up. It should all come into a line. And if it's not, for some reason, guess what? And you still like that person, you can follow up with some really good questions and determine from there what why they may have scored a certain way at a certain competency or behavior. So I think having a clear understanding, what are the behaviors, what competencies do we need for our people to be successful in an organization, also how to fit into our culture. That has to me, I didn't have all that when for years in my other organization. Over time, we developed that, and it really helped not only bring the right people in, but attract them to the organization as well. And people learn something about themselves each and every time as well. And lastly, I'll say about it, it also shows the areas that they're strong in, weak in, and then as an organization, how do we make their strengths stronger, and then we know ahead of time what weaknesses we have to work on in order to help them achieve, but also for the organization to achieve as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, man. That's fantastic. I love it. And it's been really encouraging to hear you share from your experiences. Also share what you're doing now to help professionals, business owners, and leaders really shape their organizations as a whole. And ultimately, you want to have processes in place. You want to have the right things going in motion so you continue to bring in the right type of professionals, right type of leaders, and you're really building and establishing a great culture. Overall, this is what I believe we've got to really go forward in the next really post-COVID environment, or even still COVID environment, is building this spirit of trust. Matt, I want to thank you for joining us today. I definitely will leave information for our viewers to be able to find out more about you. You've got an incredible story, and you're very humble about it, because you haven't even gone into all the great things that you've been able to accomplish in your life, and I appreciate that about you. So if you are interested in following our podcast, please subscribe, give it a 5-star rating. You could also look to giving a commercial spot, becoming a sponsor. Go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/DSB Leadership Speaking, to get more information on how you can help sponsor our program. On behalf of my identical twin brother, Danny Brown, I want to thank Matt for joining us today. Matt Blake, you're awesome. We're grateful for you. We thank you so much for sharing with our audiences today, and especially the leaders out here, how they can really establish trust and use that as the right type of currency going forward. So I want to say thank you again, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
I'm
Matt.
thrilled to be here, and Danny, David, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, we appreciate you again, and we look forward to seeing you guys again on our next episode. Keep up with Matt. Keep up with